How is everybody? Okay.
How are you?
Ask me in about 3 months.
Okay.
Someone doesn't understand how these things work. They keep dimming the front and lightening the back. All right. So, let's get right into it. I don't think there are any new announcements. Did you guys get the email about me interviewing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Perhaps I should explain what the heck is going on. So I applied for a 8-month full-time contract inside of the department doing teaching. It's actually in combination with some teaching in the Eng 1 program. And as part of the hiring process for the faculty, for the CAS faculty, they have a reasonably large process by which I have to also talk to students for an hour, and the students have to tell the people whether they like me or not, I guess. And normally nobody shows up to these things because but hey, yeah, if you want to tell the faculty that they should steer clear of that one, and that's your opportunity this afternoon at 4:30 if you want to have a chit chat about I don't know.
What happens if no students show up?
They shrug.
Oh.
Yeah. So the problem is that this is a ridiculous amount of process for an 8-month contract. This is the normal process for hiring full-time permanent tenured faculty,
Yes.
right? Permanent people from distant parts and distant lands.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that they should talk to the people in the department. Yeah, exactly. If they're just check, it's the asshole check. You don't want to hire an asshole. But it's kind of funny because I had a similar meeting with the administrative staff and the IT guys in the department yesterday, and it's kind of funny because I've been around the department longer than most of them have. So it's oh, meet the department. It's yes, you get to meet the department, But, yeah, it's part of the process. There's absolutely no obligation whatsoever. The hope is that by blasting, literally every undergraduate and graduate in the department, maybe hopefully 3 will show up. So, I don't know. If you come, we can talk about cool stuff like video games and Pokemon cards. Cool. So, we were talking about file formats. Once again, we'll be talking about 3 in particular: comma-separated value, or CSV files, JSON files, JavaScript object notation, and YAML, yet another markup language. So, I know I did this poll last time, but how many people have worked with CSV files before? Cool. It'll be all of you by the end of this semester. So, what a CSV file is it's a plain text file format for storing tabulated data. I sometimes, somewhat jokingly, call it rectangular data because it's given to you in rectangles. So Normally, you will have seen this type of data in the form of an Excel spreadsheet, right? This is sort of your touchstone for these types of things. Many different applications require data in this kind of a form. It's actually not completely dissimilar from the database form that we're going to be talking about when we talk about SQL in not too much time. Different spreadsheet programs, of course, have different ways they format data. They have different features. They have different formulas. They have different things which are considered valid. CSV files are a very plain, universal transferal file type that is used to transfer data between different systems that have different expectations of what the data looks like. In a CSV file, you are only putting literals in there, right? They can be of any data type that, there's no such thing as a data type in a CSV file. As we are going to see, when you read a CSV file into Python, it assumes everything's a string. And if it's an integer or a float or what have you, you must perform a manual conversion from string to whatever the expected data type is. That's a common error, by the way, is to not do that. The CSV file itself is just a bunch of characters, right? You interpret them how that makes sense for your particular application. Each line in a CSV file is a data record. Each record in the file contains multiple fields separated by commas, hence the name, comma separated value. It is a collection of values separated by commas. Optionally, you can have a header row containing field names. Not all of them contain this, but it's fairly common. No single standard definition of the CSV format exists, so there can sometimes be compatibility problems. Solving CSV compatibility problems is a primary application of Python scripts, at least in my working life. For example, when Avenue outputs a CSV file, it has a bunch of information Avenue considers relevant. Mosaic does not consider that same information to be relevant. So you have to trim the data down to that piece, those pieces of data which Mosaic wants, right? In addition, you have to add certain pieces of data which Mosaic expects, which are not included in Avenue because the systems don't communicate that well. I find it there's anyway. Yeah. So that's my whole reaction to Mosaic in general, is just So this is what a CSV file will look like in practice. They can get much larger than this, obviously. But if you have data such as last name, first name, MAC ID, 81, 82, say scores out of whatever, this is encoded in a CSV file by just listing everything and separating it with commas. Sometimes these things are tabbed so that all of the columns line up. Most of the time they will not be. The purpose of a CSV file is not necessarily to be human readable. You can read them if you need to, but in general, you should try to avoid reading them if you can. It's very easy to take a CSV file and import it into like a spreadsheet application which lines everything up very nicely and is much easier to read. So, digging around in the plain text is, not necessarily, there are probably better ways to spend your weekend, shall we say. So, reading CSV files from Python, and I hope everybody's paying attention to this, because, You will be expected to do this or similar on certain things that are coming up at the end of the semester. Assuming, assuming the campus doesn't, like, a fault line doesn't break around campus and it just slides into the bay. Which, I wouldn't be surprised at this point. The CSV module, Python library, contains functions for working with CSV files. The CSV module contains what? Well. I've been pranked. All right, so there you go. I will read everything that's on the slide. So if you want to insert anything like, what's that movie? Anchorman style into the prompt, Anyway. So the process for working with a CSV file is one more step in addition to our regular file reading process. So we open up the CSV file we're interested in read mode, give it a file handle object, or it gives out a file handle object. We then have this additional line, grades equals csv.reader file handle. So this line takes each individual line in the CSV file and converts it into it converts it into a data type in Python rather than just leaving it as a big string of commas, which is what you'd get if you just read it without using the CSV reader, right? So let's see an example. We'll just give it a go. All right. So first, I will create a new CSV file, stuff.csv. I guess I'm not feeling very creative today. Okay. What's a video game? Pokemon. How good is Pokemon out of 10? Okay. How many people in the room have played Pokemon? 30. Without actually counting. What's another video game? Zelda. How good is Zelda out of 10? 8. Okay. How many people have played Zelda? 20. The rest of you need to play Zelda. It's really good. It's better than the score would indicate. Yes, sir?
Hexy hash?
Hexy hashy. Yeah. How good is Hexy hashy out of 10? 11. Yeah. Let's be honest. It's like a 2. I mean, I'm willing to accept that. How many people in this room have played Hexy hashy? 2 people. Wonderful. All right, so now how about Super Steampunk Pinball 2D?
What?
That's my other video game that I published. It's actually a lot better than Hexy hashy. I'm just going to tell you, it's like a 4. I think it's a 4. Right? How many people have played my pinball game? 0. There we go. Incidentally, just because I've got games on Steam, if you buy my games on Steam, you're not getting any more grades. Just so you know. That would be a conflict of interest. As well as being deeply unethical. So, with open, well, and this stuff just is terrible and needs to go. You're all looking at trailers now, aren't you?
Probably.
Yeah.
This is how you get your income up. Advertise the game for free during class.
Man, if that worked. I mean, you know, I thought the pinball game was pretty good. It was its bonus round is like prog gen, so kind of cool. Infinite vertical scrolling tower of pinball. See how far up the tower you can get in the timeline. Very kind of classic video game stuff.
Can you add a header line to this?
Oh yes, let's add a header line. That's a fantastic idea. Thank you. So, video game rating and user base, I guess. So, one thing that I'd like to draw your attention to right here. Notice I'm not putting spaces around the commas, right? If I put spaces around the commas, those will be included in the strings when they're read in for the CSV file. So if you include a bunch of spaces after that, then you're going to have a bunch of white space at the end of the string, which, you know, may or may not be important, but, you know, because I'm a hygiene-obsessed professor and I hate all kinds of extra white space, I'm going to leave it out. So I'm not that hygiene-obsessed. It's impossible to be hygiene-obsessed when you have small children. Yes. It's like, okay, true story, right? Last week we had a cold, and my son Felix was like right with it, right? And he's like 1.5. So like a thing he does is try to grab people's food on their plates, right? And like he was like standing beside the table trying to grab the stuff on my plate with his slimy snot hands. And I was like, no, stop, go, it's gross. And like at that point I didn't have the cold yet, you know? And my wife was like, do you have any idea what I've been dealing with all day? How dare you? How dare you be better than having snot hands touch your food? So, you know, the snot hands touched my food and then I got the cold. But I would have gotten the cold anyway, so. Yeah, but, the Bible has it wrong. It's not from dust we were created and to dust we return. It is from slime we were created, and to slime we return. So, there you go. I've just fixed the Bible. Anywho. So, where was I? Ah, yes, good. So, we're opening this thing in read mode as file handle. We then create a CSV reader object, which we will call CSV reader object. We will then call, import CSV. That's the most important part, import CSV. If you're doing a test or an assignment or anything, if it's a CSV file, import CSV. If it's a JSON file, import JSON. That's the first step. Just do it. Don't even think about it. Just memorize that step. Import the damn library. All right? I don't tell you to memorize much because I prefer you to view programming as a series of tools applied to different situations. But in this situation, If the question says CSV, import CSV, okay? Because believe it or not, lots of people forget that on the test, and then they're trying to parse out the CSV file on the test instead of using the library. So they're taking way more time than it actually should take. And it's like, oh, I spent my entire test doing question 3 because I forgot to import the CSV file and CSV library, and I'm like, yes?
Will the methods of the CSV library be provided on a syntax sheet?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I'll double check, but I believe for subsequent testing in this class, we're being upgraded to the ultimate syntax reference sheet, which I believe does include reference for all the file IO stuff, but I'll double check. So, CSV reader object, CSV dot, what is it? What's the, even I can't remember, and I've been teaching this course for years. There we go. So once you've read it in like this, the CSV reader object itself contains a definition for iterable. So the easiest way to access the individual lines of the CSV file, for line in CSV reader object, print line. So let's see what these lines print out. Ta-da! The data has been imported. It has been imported as a series of lists. Right? So, good. So, one thing you may notice about this, the headings in the CSV file are imported in the same manner as everything else. Now, this might be a little clumsy. Either you encode what each field means and ignore the first line where you just if you keep a counter or a flag or something, and if it's the first iteration of the loop, you ignore it, and because that'll be the header file. A better solution is to import this thing as a series of dictionaries where the headings are the keys. There is a way to do that. If, rather than a reader, you use csv.dictReader, that reads everything in as a series of dictionaries rather than as just a series of plain lists, which is much more convenient. That being said, you still have to know whether or not the data has a header, because if it's just data in the first row, calling CSV dict reader on that will set those data up as the keys for each of the subsequent dictionaries, which of course is probably not what you're going for, right? So let's take a look here. So you can see, rather than having a whole bunch of lists where the data is not really associated with any category whatsoever, we now have each piece of data associated with a key, which is much more readable, accessible, etc. Make sense? Cool. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Are you able to kind of just kind of the same thing in JSON? Pretty sure you can set things as variables. I don't have a lot of experience with JSON or CSV. Can you do the same?
In CSV files?
Yeah.
No, there's no capability of doing that. In a CSV file, everything contained in the file is considered a literal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
be reasonably straightforward, right? I should be putting some of you to sleep. I think I can see some drowsiness in the crowd. You know they're drowsy because when you call them out for sleeping in class, they're still sleeping. I'm not supposed to call out students because I might offend people. But come on. You know what? It's always been my dream. You know what else has always been my dream? I want a Nerf gun that shoots marshmallows, right? So that when people are sleeping in my class, I can just reach into my briefcase, pull out my Nerf gun that shoots marshmallows, and just like pop, 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 wake them up with marshmallows. Anyway, so we have discussed reading from a CSV file. Let's now discuss the creation of the same. It may not surprise you to learn that we create a CSV writer object in the same way that we create a CSV reader object. The only difference is that we're doing CSV.writer instead of CSV.reader. There is incidentally also a dict-writer method that's coincident with the dict-reader method. It's slightly it's much easier to sort of spoof it going to the writing phase than to go from the reading phase. Because if you just write the first row as, line 1 dot keys, and then after that it's line 1 dot values, line 2 dot values, line 3 dot values, then basically you've got the same thing as that's how you would go from a series of dictionaries into a CSV game, right? And it's, very loopable and very straightforward to do. So you don't, I would say you don't really necessarily need it's a lot less work to do a dictionary writing operation here than it is to do a dictionary reading operation, in my personal opinion. But, anyway, so the write row method of the CSV writer object expects your data to be in lists, so that's how it should be provided. If your data is already represented as a list of lists, then you can write it out all at once. Write rows, plural, takes a list of lists rather than having to do it one by one. So it goes. Time for an example. So let's just say we are opening up a second file with open other stuff.csv in write mode as file handle. By the way, if you haven't picked this up yet, the file names that you pick are technically arbitrary. In the course of assignments and other related things, we will ask you to produce files with particular file names, because the auto-grader is going to be looking for files with particular file names, and if they don't have the right file name, it can't find the file, and if it can't find the file, you don't get a grade. Yes?
Is it okay to just both of the files or be opening with that page? Is it okay?
Oh, no, that's not okay. That would overwrite the definition of FH. Thank you for catching that. Boop. FH2. So, CSV writer object is equal to CSV dot write FH2. I think it's actually writer. Again, I can never remember. It's writer. Boop. There we go. So, we will print the lines, and at the same time, we will say line at video game because, you know, we've used it a few times already. Line at rating, if I'm getting this correctly, yeah, is equal to cast as float line at rating, just so we can see what that does. And CSV writer object dot write line. Let's see how that goes. No attribute, right line. Get out of here. Right row. Okay. Fake news. I do not make mistakes. Anything you see in lecture which appears to be me making a mistake is actually not a mistake. That's how things work around here. So, if we take a look at the files that we now have in this directory, you'll notice we have otherstuff.csv, which has been created. And if we take a look inside of the contents of that file, there we go. Whoops. All right. Things are slightly more complicated then. So what it's been doing is writing the keys of the dictionary rather than the values. So this is why we test things. Again, any mistakes which are made in class are, not actually mistakes. It's all for educational purposes. So,
Like, is it okay to just have like video game, comma, rating, comma, user base, like over and over in our other stuff? Is that what we meant to?
say that again?
Like in our like other stuff, .csv, there's like video game comma, rating, comma, user base. Is this what we meant to create?
No.
You're using a normal writer instead of a dictionary writer.
I know. Yeah, I'm aware of the problem. So, I'm sure I've shown you guys how to use flags before, right? Maybe?
I don't think you discussed it in class.
Okay. It's easy enough for you guys should be able to figure it out yourselves, actually. But this is what a flag is and why it's used, right? So, I want the behavior to be slightly different on the first iteration of this program. In like actual technical point of fact, there's a lot of redundancy here. Anything existing on both branches of an if statement can be popped outside of the if statement, right? Home, delete, this print statement, yeah, that's fine. Home, there we go. Delete, and then we can actually remove the else entirely. Okay, there we go. Optimization, people. So, I want the behavior on the first iteration of the loop to be slightly different than the iteration on all subsequent operations of the loop, right? On the first iteration, I want to write in the keys of the dictionary before the values are written in. That will create the header row. The way that I do this is I create a Boolean variable named flag. The purpose of flag is to control the execution of this if statement so that it is only executed once the first time that the loop iterates. So flag is set to true before the loop starts. Once in the loop, the first time we hit flag, we enter the if statement because, you know, if a Boolean variable, if that's true, then you enter, right? We execute this line of code, then flag is set to false. So for all subsequent operations, all subsequent iterations of this loop, this if statement will fail to be entered. And that's what the flag does. It controls entry into this particular part of the code. Right? This is what flags mean in sort of your regular, ordinary programming context. Flags mean something slightly different if you're talking about an operating systems context. You have things like system flags and status registers. Like, for example, the way that the way that abnormal program termination actually works is that the operating system keeps a series of values in memory which indicate whether or not particular signals are being sent to the currently active or to a particular program, right? So there's a bunch of signals associated with the program, right? If you go in through, you know, Task Manager and you request Windows to kill a program, which you will frequently have to do because you're using Windows, what is actually happening is the operating system is setting a flag for that process, and because it's Windows and Windows is the worst, I don't know if they've solved this yet, but like I know like the last like Windows operating system I used was 8, and if you ask a program to be killed by Task Manager, what will most often happen is the operating system will wait politely for the program to respond to the signal to indicate its own termination, which of course it won't do if it's in the vast majority of cases where it's actually frozen because it's in an infinite loop or some goddamn thing, right? So it's like Windows will waste your time waiting for a program that's obviously frozen to respond to the kill signal, right? And it gives it like some number of seconds instead of some number of milliseconds, which it should, right? Except of course it's Windows, so everything is, you know. I was about to say something very unkind. Windows sits like an obese pig on top of your memory. It's just a great big fat barn animal, just like sitting there doing nothing on top of your memory. But anyway, yeah, so it waits around for the signal to handle the signal, but you know, obviously the signal is going to go unhandled because if the program was capable of handling the signal, you wouldn't be trying to kill it. So you know, so that's how things work in Windows. And if you're in a sane operating system, then you know, it just kills it, right? So yes.
Could you also just put that whole like right row line keys or this shouldn't just move the whole flag?
Well, the problem is that we're using a for loop, so line doesn't exist outside this context.
Well, then you can just use the CSV reader, CSV reader object.
CSV reader object.keys. Oh, does that work too? Well, well, the reader object isn't a dictionary. It's a set of dictionaries. It's a list of dictionaries. So you could, I guess, do I don't know if like CSV reader object 0 dot keys or something. Something like this might work. Dict reader is not subscriptable. So for loops really, I think, are the easiest way to get stuff out of one of these things. Because like the thing is, this thing is pretending to be a file stream, right? So if you read a row out of it,
Oh, it's an object that it writes.
yeah, so it's going to, the next one it wants to give you will be the next row, right? So yeah. So anyway, run the program again. Cat other stuff.csv, and you can see that we have our header row back, we have our data back, all of the strings in the first bit have been converted to uppercase, and this is how it chooses to print floating point numbers, which may be of interest to you. Make sense? Good, good?
Oh. And that's a CSV file now, so if you were to read that again, you get templates or as a string.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, like, for example, see how, like, my operating system has decided that CSV files should be interpretable by a spreadsheet program?
Yeah.
The default binding is actually to LibreOffice Calc in this, which, you know, so there you go. Because, believe it or not, I don't actually have Microsoft Office. It's pure Linux, man. Open source the whole way. Screw them and their subscription models, man. Like, what the heck is that all about? It used to be, when you bought your computer, you would buy the Office software and you didn't care about updates because it was frigging Office software. It's like, what could they possibly do to make it better? It's like a word processor, you know? But now, everything's online, on wire. You have to have an internet connection to verify your identity, and it's all getting creepingly dystopian.
By default, it will save to the cloud and not take personal.
Yeah. You know what really did it for me in Microsoft? I tried like ripping a CD,
Oh.
and I found that like Windows Explorer will prevent you from doing that.
No.
Right? So like, who made that decision? Right? It wasn't Microsoft. It was like Big Music, right? It's like Big Music comes up to Microsoft and says, hey, could you put this in your operating system so that we make more money? And Microsoft's like, well, what's in it for me? And it's like, money, obviously. Okay. All right, we'll do it.